Hello, you've made it here to this quiet little corner of the evening, a place where the weight of the day loosens its hold. Before our story begins, settle yourself somewhere comfortable. Let your shoulders soften as if they have been waiting all day to sigh. Allow your hands to rest, with palms open, fingers light and unhurried. And notice how the surface beneath you supports you fully, holding you so you no longer have to hold yourself. Take a slow breath in through your nose, a breath that arrives like a calm tide rolling onto sand, and let it slip out again in an easy sigh that carries the day's dust away. Take one more soft inhale, filling the ribs gently like a lantern swelling with light, and then breathe it out, smooth and long, leaving your chest quiet and easy. If your eyelids want to close, you may let them drift downward without effort, lowering like a velvet curtain before a play begins. You may still notice the small sounds around you, the gentle hum of a distant appliance, the far-off rustle of the world outside the room, or perhaps the quiet rhythm of your own breath, and, instead of fighting those sounds away, let them become part of tonight's lullaby. Imagine now a single candle flame, small and steady and golden, breathing in rhythm with you. And watch in your mind how the air around it quivers softly, carrying delicate waves of warmth into the cool evening air. With each breath you take, the glow of that candle spreads just a little, as if brushing warmth along your neck and easing the muscles across your shoulders, gliding down the length of your arms until it reaches your fingertips and leaves them relaxed and warm, before settling gently in the center of your chest. Tonight's story will unfold slowly, the way a thread slips across a loom, weaving calm across your thoughts. There is no need to follow every detail closely. You can simply let the words wash over you, like the hush of wind in tall summer grass, and if your mind drifts toward sleep, that will be perfectly all right. Our story begins in the hush of a high, round tower, in a distant medieval castle, where moonlight dusts the pale stone walls with silver. It is close to midnight, the hour when the day's clamor has fallen quiet. Down in the courtyard below, the stable horses stand in their stalls, breathing in long, even sighs. The drawbridge creaks softly in answer to the rhythm of the sea tide pressing against the moat, and a lone watchman hums an old tune that drifts into the sea breeze and fades like a lullaby forgotten halfway through. High above, behind a narrow arched window in that tower, a single candle flickers, its light casting soft shapes across the curved walls, and beside the candle sits Lady Isolde. Her chamber is round, the walls made of pale limestone blocks that hold a gentle coolness even in the warmth of summer nights. In a corner a hearth glows with a low, steady ember, not so much for light but enough to keep the midnight chill at bay. From a dark beam above the hearth, small bundles of dried lavender and rosemary hang upside down, their faded blossoms giving the air a faint herbal perfume that mingles with the trace of wood smoke. The floor beneath her bare feet is strewn with fresh green rushes, reeds cut from the riverside earlier that day, a medieval custom that softened stone floors and lent a sweet scent to the chamber. Now and then a night breeze steals in through the arrow-slit window and stirs the rushes, making them whisper gently across the floor as though a sleepy cat were brushing its tail along the stones. Lady Isolde sits at her warp-weighted loom, a tall wooden frame that leans slightly back against the wall. At the base of the loom, smooth round stones, heavy as river pebbles, dangle from the bottom of taut vertical threads, keeping them stretched and ready to receive the colored weft. This kind of loom, older than the spinning wheel, was once common throughout Europe. Its simple design, using gravity itself to keep the threads even and tight, and it produced strong, beautiful cloth for centuries before other machines took its place. Isolde's hands move slowly and unhurried. She lifts the wooden shuttle, carved slender and light as a bird's wing, guides it through the open shed of threads, then draws it gently back again. Each pass makes a quiet sliding sigh, followed by a muted thrum as she taps the weft into place, the kind of soft, rhythmic sound that feels as though it has no beginning and no end, only the comfort of repetition. Outside, the gentle wind combs through the branches of an ancient elm tree that leans close to the tower wall, the leaves rustling in a language older than any spoken tongue, like green silk brushing against stone. A lone cricket hidden near the warm hearth begins its slow, even chirp, sounding as though it is keeping time with the loom's rocking cadence. You can imagine yourself sitting nearby on a cushioned wooden chair, feeling the hush of candlelight upon your cheek, watching the glow of the hearth paint gentle embers along the walls. You might notice the faint earthy tang of woad dye rising from the wool in her basket, a dye once so valued in medieval times that whole fields and summers were devoted to the plant. You may sense the sweet trace of beeswax candles and the light smoke winding up the chimney into the quiet night air. In the basket at Isolde's side lie several skeins of wool. One, a soft woad, blew the shade of the night sky at the deepest hour before dawn, and another dyed, a rich madder red drawn from the roots of the madder plant, glowing warmly even in the dim candlelight. She often says these colors mirror the heavens, the blue for the wide velvet sky of midnight, the red for the distant unseen fires of the stars that shine within it. As she works, her gaze drifts now and then toward the narrow window. Beyond the tower's edge, the constellations move slowly in their ancient procession, steady and serene as the turning of the seasons. Tonight, Orion's belt gleams low in the east, like three small pearls laid carefully on dark silk, and higher above them, the silver scatter of the Pleiades cluster shimmers with a frosted brilliance that seems almost close enough to touch. Isolde hums under her breath while she weaves, a tune she learned long ago from the nursemaid who cared for her in childhood. A melody once believed to soothe the restless spirits, said to wander near the castle walls. Her gown is of plain homespun wool, dyed with the dark walnut husks of autumn to a deep brown. At her throat she wears a modest silver clasp, a gift from the village blacksmith whose father once repaired the very loom she now uses. On a small stool beside her rests a clay pitcher of cool water and a shallow wooden bowl holding two bright green apples. A simple midnight fare that was common in households that worked late through the winters. A single pale moth drifts around the candle flame, dipping and rising like a tiny boat on a golden sea. The flicker of the light glints softly in Isolde's calm eyes as she pauses for a moment to stretch her fingers and watch the moth's delicate dance. If you listen closely in your mind, you might hear her loom against your slide, tap. She slide, tap, each sound a step further into the quiet. The candle's flame leans ever so slightly as the night breeze brushes in through the high window and finds your cheek with a cool, tender breath. You breathe in that coolness and let it out slowly, as if following the loom's gentle rhythm. The weight of the day slides from your shoulders, the way a cloak slips from a traveler's back after a long road. You feel lighter, calmer, wrapped in the soft hush of this tower's night. They say that Lady Isolde weaves not only cloth, but also the shapes of the constellations themselves, setting each star as glimmer into her tapestry, so that when her work is done, it will mirror the heavens and guide wanderers who find themselves on moonless roads. Some in the village whisper that the loom's smooth stone weights were taken long ago from a circle of ancient standing stones by the sea, and that a faint trace of their quiet magic still lingers in the threads she weaves. For now, she is simply a serene figure in the candlelit tower, her hands moving with patient certainty, her eyes soft and reflective beneath the moonlight, surrounded by the hush of castle walls that sleep through the dark. You may linger here beside her a while longer, in the warm scent of beeswax, in the hush of blue and red threads crossing beneath her fingers, in the watchful silver silence of the stars beyond the window. The story of her loom and the night sky has only just begun, and there are many more layers of history and starlight waiting quietly to be revealed. The night deepens while the candle's flame grows smaller, its wick bending under the weight of melted wax that pools around its base like liquid amber. Somewhere far below, a door's iron hinge murmurs faintly as the watchman makes his round along the courtyard wall. The sound drifts upward as if carried on a silken ribbon of cool air, then fades again, leaving only the loom's sighing motion and the slow crackle of embers in the hearth. Isolde pauses to reach for the clay pitcher, pouring a thread of water into a small wooden cup. The cup trembles with the ripples of its filling, catching the candle's glow along its rim as if it held a sliver of moonlight. She drinks slowly, the way one savors the quiet more than the taste, then sets the cup down upon the stool, where it makes a soft hollow thud that seems to echo through the chamber's round walls. She brushes her fingers along the newly woven strip of fabric, and you can almost feel it tooth the texture of fine wool drawn snug, and even by her patient hands. Cool and smooth beneath her touch, its surface faintly raised, where each colored thread crosses another. The pattern is still only half formed, yet already it shows a scatter of stars stitched in silver thread against the blue of midnight sky. She leans in a little closer to catch the shimmer of the metallic thread, glinting whenever the candle's flame bends toward it. In the stillness, her mind drifts to the stories of the stars that she heard long ago in the village square. From the old storyteller, who came each autumn fair with his tall walking staff, carved with tiny runes. He had told of shepherds who once crossed the northern hills, guided only by Orion's belt, and of sailors who believed the Pleiades carried the memory of all those who had drowned. At sea, their souls rising to the heavens to light the way for others. Isolde's lips shaped the words of one of those tales, now in a hushed whisper, more like a breath than a voice, as though speaking them aloud could weave them secretly into the threads of her work. She tells of a silver-haired queen in a distant age who spent each new moon's night at her own loom, stitching the image of constellations into her cloaks so her warriors would never lose their way in the dark forests. A gust of night air curls suddenly round the tower wall and slides through the narrow window slit, stirring the rushes at Isolde's feet, so they whisper again across the stone floor, and for a heartbeat, the candle's flame leans far enough to cast the loom's tall shadow like a dark ship's mast against the wall. The breeze carries the scent of damp earth and the faraway salt of the sea, mingling with the lavender and the faint wood smoke, until the chamber smells like a meadow beside a distant shore. The moth continues its quiet drifting near the flame, tracing lazy circles, sometimes so near the light that the fine dust of its wings almost glows, sometimes wheeling away to vanish briefly into the dim upper air of the room. Its fragile dance holds Isolde's gaze, and she smiles at it gently, as though greeting a companion. She lowers the shuttle again and guides the next line of thread through the warp. The sound is soft and steady. Sheslide, tap. Sheslide, tap. The sound of something being built, one heartbeat at a time. If you listen closely with the ear of the imagination, you might sense how that rhythm matches the gentle sway of a cradle, or the rocking of a boat upon a very calm lake under the stars. Far below, the castle's well bucket knocks once against the stone wall of its shaft as the breeze swings it, and the hollow note floats up the courtyard like the pluck of a low-pitched harp string. A hound resting in the gatehouse lifts its head, gives a single soft bark that sounds more like a yawn than a warning, then settles again into silence. The moon climbs higher outside the tower window until its light enters the chamber in a long silver beam, striking the loom's wooden frame and spilling across the rush-covered floor to touch Isolde's bare toes. She notices the cool gleam and moves her foot just slightly so that the moonlight washes across her skin as though she were stepping into a shallow brook. The weaving grows longer beneath her hands. A thin breeze carries the distant chime of a bell buoy out at sea, where fishermen's boats are anchored for the night. Its faint metallic note joins the cricket's measured chirp and the loom's gentle rocking to form a kind of lullaby, made not by voices, but by the world itself. Isolde's thoughts wander to the villagers who will rise at dawn, the baker who will stir his first fire while the stars are still visible through his open shutter, the miller who will shoulder his sacks before the cock's first crow, the children who will carry water up from the well, their wooden buckets bumping gently against their knees as they climb the hill. She imagines the tapestry she weaves one day being carried down the spiral stairs of the tower and hung in the village chapel, so that all might look upon the stars indoors, even on the cloudiest nights of winter. She smooths the newest section of cloth with her palm, murmuring a small blessing beneath her breath, not a formal prayer, but a wish that whoever sleeps beneath this woven sky may be guided home no matter how far they wander. A faint rustle at the door draws her eyes toward it, though she knows it is only the settling of the old oak planks within their iron hinges. Still, the sound recalls to her the memory of her mother stepping into the room many years ago, carrying a fresh spun skein of wool wrapped across her arms, smiling in the same quiet way Isolde does now. That memory warms her, and the warmth settles into the room's hush like a second, gentler fire beside the embered hearth. The candle gutters low, its flame narrowing to a blue-tinged spark at the wick's tip. Isolde sets the shuttle carefully across the loom's beam and leans back slightly on her stool, stretching her fingers until the joints pop softly, then lets her hands fall into her lap with an air of deep contentment. She gazes out at the stars again and lets her eyes rest upon a bright one low in the south that seems to shimmer more intently than the others, as though it recognizes her. Your own breathing by now may have found a rhythm close to the loom's, slow, measured, without strain. Each breath may feel like a soft tide washing in, then gliding back out, leaving your chest lighter each time. The room around you, imagined though it is, may seem to hold its own pulse, a slow, calming beat in the hush of the tower. Somewhere in the distance, the watchman's hum returns. An old folk song from the valley below the castle, rising and falling with a melody so simple that it could be mistaken for a lullaby. It drifts upward on the wind until it hovers near the tower window, like a forgotten note, searching for a home. Isolde draws the last sip of water from the cup, then sets it aside and reaches for one of the green apples. She polishes it on the sleeve of her brown homespun gown and bites gently, the soft crunch sounding unusually loud in the quiet chamber. The taste is crisp and tart, the juice shining on her lower lip as she chews slowly. She places the remaining apple back in the wooden bowl and wipes her fingers on a square of linen that hangs from the loom's frame. The moonlight climbs higher on the wall, leaving the candle a small glow, looking more and more like a golden memory beside the stronger silver beam. The moth has disappeared, perhaps finally slipping out into the night air through the high slit window, leaving only a faint dusting of its passage around the flame. Isolde returns her attention to the partly woven tapestry and traces, one finger lightly along the curve of a silver-stitched constellation, smiling as if greeting an old friend, her eyes half closed while she hums again the tune from her nursemaid. The notes lingering in the chamber's round stone space, like threads of sound that refuse to be woven anywhere else. The quiet of the tower thickens until it feels as though even time itself has slowed to the rhythm of the loom and the tide against the moat below. You may notice your body resting more heavily now, your breath gentler, your thoughts softening at the edges like wool teased loose for spinning. The story will follow Isolde further through the night, toward the moment when the tapestry first begins to show the entire sky in its true pattern. But for now, the hush of the tower holds steady. The loom waits patiently, the stars drift above, the moon's silver beam lingers across her work, and the night folds softly around all that it shelters within these ancient walls. The hour grows late enough that even the courtyard's hounds have given up their watchful listening and now sleep curled nose, two-tail in the straw, their sides rising and falling like small bellows in the moon-silvered dark. Far above them, a stray cloud slides across the night sky. And for a few moments the moonlight that had been shining boldly through the tower's narrow slit is softened to a pale blur, as if a veil of fine gauze had been drawn across the window. The chamber itself seems to sense the change, deepening in shadow and quiet until the candle's trembling glow becomes the lone warm star inside the stone circle of the room. Isolde adjusts her seat, lifting the hem of her wool gown slightly so that it no longer wrinkles beneath her knees. Her movements are small and unhurried, the way someone might shift in a long-held posture during prayer. Not to break the stillness, but to let it continue more comfortably. She gathers the fall of her dark hair over one shoulder, so it will not brush the warp as she leans forward, then lets her fingers hover for a moment above the shuttle, as though asking the loom's permission to begin again. When she resumes, the rhythm returns as naturally as a heartbeat resuming after a sigh. The gentle slide of the shuttle, the soft pull of the beater bar, bringing each thread snug against the last, the hush of wool gliding against wool. The pattern that forms now is of slender white arcs, sweeping across the field of deep blue. Arcs that will, when enough are gathered, resemble the slow curved rise of the Milky Way across the summer sky. She works with a patience that feels less like labor than devotion, pausing at times to study the stars themselves beyond the window to be sure her memory of their placement is true. In the silence, her mind drifts to a story told in the convent school where she once spent a winter. That every thread on a loom carries a silent echo of the sheep esplit whose fleece it came from, and that if a weaver listens closely enough in the hours just before dawn, she might hear the gentle hum of those sheep, far away in distant meadows, blessing the work with their contented murmurs. The thought brings a tiny, private smile to her face. A single coal in the hearth shifts with a muted crackle and sends up a feather-thin trail of sparks that winked briefly before fading. The air in the chamber smells faintly of warm ash and lanolin, of lavender from the dried sprigs tucked in the rushes, and of damp stone cooling as the night air brushes across it. Outside, the sea wind carries the low, steady hush of waves meeting the shingle far below the cliff, a sound so constant that it seems to form the bass note of the entire castle's nocturnal song. She reaches for the small basket of dyed yarn resting at her feet and draws out a skein the color of ripe wheat, pale gold spun fine enough to slip easily through the eye of the shuttle. Before laying it across the warp, she strokes it once between her fingers, as if reminding herself of its softness and of the field from which the flax was pulled in the spring. She remembers the dyer explaining, with a craftsman's quiet pride, that the color came not from saffron, as many believed, but from weld, a humble roadside plant whose tall stalks held enough bright pigment to rival any spice trader's treasure. The memory of that conversation weaves itself invisibly into her work as she begins the new line of stitching. Beyond the walls of the chamber, a barn owl gives a slow, hollow-throated call that glides through the night air like a sighing reed flute. Isolde tilts her head slightly to listen and then lowers her gaze back to the loom. With the air of someone who has just been greeted by an unseen friend, she hums again the simple lullaby her nursemaid once used to hush restless infants, a tune with only a handful of notes that repeat in a round, their gentle rise and fall echoing the owl's own lonely cadence. The moon emerges once more from behind its gauze of cloud, and the silver beam stretches farther into the chamber than before, reaching the edge of the wooden stool and touching the basket of yarn so that the skeins gleam softly as though lit from within. The moth has returned to, or perhaps it is another one, circling slowly in the moonlit patch of air near the window where the breeze slips in. Its delicate wings beat almost invisibly fast, stirring the beam of light as if to remind the still room that even in such deep quiet, there is always some gentle motion. Isolde lets her attention wander outward to the thought of the castle's sleeping inhabitants. The steward resting in his chamber with his ledger laid aside. The youngest page boy curled beneath a coarse blanket dreaming of one day carrying a banner in the tourney field. The cook, whose strong hands even now in sleep are curved as if still kneading bread. She imagines them all beneath the same roof of stone, gathered by chance and duty, sharing the same breath of night air. The tapestry she weaves will belong to them too, its stars silently blessing the rooms in which they sleep. The wind shifts and for an instant brings with it the smell of the sea-salted tide pool that lies just beyond the drawbridge, mingled with the faint sweetness of heather from the cliffside. She draws in that scent unconsciously as though it were a draught of cool water, her eyelids lowering a little, her shoulders loosening under the simple pleasure of breathing something wild and fresh. Her hands continue their steady work, even as her mind sinks further into the calm of the hour. If you were sitting quietly nearby, you might notice how the atmosphere itself seems to thicken with peace, as if the night has drawn its own soft curtain across the tower so that no worry of day could intrude. Your own breath might slow to match the rhythm of Isolde's weaving, in and out, the measured motion of hands drawing threads into place, while time, like a patient spinner, lets the world drift onward at its unhurried pace. The tapestry now reaches the halfway point. Isolde leans back a little to view it from a distance, and in doing so, lets her gaze stray to the window, where the constellations themselves keep vigil. She lifts her hand and, without quite realizing it, traces in the air the shape of a distant star cluster, as if sketching it into the night before she anchors it in thread. The gesture is slow, almost drowsy, like that of a person half dreaming, yet still intent upon their purpose. In the hush that follows, another memory comes to her of a tale her father once told at the hearth on a stormy night, of how, in the far north, certain monks believed that every soul released from earthly life left a spark upon the sky to help guide travelers. The idea lingers warmly in her chest, and she hums once more, softer now, each note landing gently like a feather upon the loom's frame. The candle has grown so short that the brass holder has begun to glimmer beneath the wax's rim. Its light quivers with each faint draft that wanders through the slit window, and its reflection trembles upon the curved iron of the loom's weight. In this tender, shifting glow, the woven stars seem almost to wink at her, as if promising that her vigil will be rewarded. Her breathing slows, and her eyes follow the silvered pathway of moonlight sliding across the chamber floor, toward the hearth. She lets her palm rest lightly on the fabric, feeling the coolness of the metal threads beneath her skin, a coolness that somehow makes her feel warmer inside. Around her, the stone walls hold their breath, as though the tower itself wishes to keep this moment undisturbed for as long as possible. The hush deepens. Even the sea seems to have paused between waves. The loom, the candle, the moonbeam, the soft humming weaver, all appear suspended in a fragile harmony that needs no witness beyond the stars themselves. The first hints of dawn remain far beyond the horizon, and yet the tower's hush feels subtly changed, as though the night itself has begun to grow heavy and ready to give way to morning. A pale halo forms at the rim of the western sky where the moon drifts lower, dimming just enough to let the distant stars seem brighter for a while. Their shimmer slides across the tower window like powdered frost, so delicate that even the slow flutter of the moth's wings appears bold beside it. Isolde's fingers pause above the warp, her attention caught by that change in the night's hue. She lifts her gaze toward the horizon line visible through the narrow slit of the window, seeing not yet the red of sunrise, but the faintest wash of lighter ink that promises it will come. The sight stirs something quiet and reflective in her. The knowledge that each night yields to dawn, no matter how endless it may feel in its deepest hour. Her shuttle lies across the loom's beam, while she sits back for a moment, her shoulders eased against the curve of the wooden stool. She draws in a slow breath that tastes faintly of cooled ash and moonlit sea air, then lets it slip out again through parted lips with a sigh, so soft it barely stirs the loose strand of hair that brushes her cheek. Her eyes follow the smoke rising from the last glowing ember in the hearth as it spirals upward, and fades into the dark arch of the chimney like a memory leaving its trace in the air. Somewhere far below, the castle's old bronze bell stirs, not yet rung but creaking gently as the breeze brushes the rope against its side. The hollow note is so distant it is more sensed than heard, a soft promise that morning will be announced in due time. The tapestry now holds almost an entire sky. The deep indigo of the wool, darkened by the shadows of night, seems to ripple like water beneath her hand as she smooths it. Constellations are scattered across it in silver, white, and faint gold. The brighter stars, connected by fine threads of palest blue. At its center she has begun to weave a slender arc of pale rose that will echo the soft light of dawn she imagines cresting over distant hills. She reaches into the basket for the next skein of thread, dyed with the juice of crushed madder root, deep and warm like wine. It has been spun thin and even, catching the candle's light as though holding within it a trace of embers. She remembers the dyer's apprentice telling her that the roots must be harvested from plants at least 3 years old to gain that richness of tone. Too young and the red remains dull, and weak too old and the root grows woody and pale. This knowledge, simple yet precise, feels like a whispered secret of the earth itself entrusted to those who listen. The loom's steady shy-slide tap resumes, quiet as a lullaby, sung by a careful parent beside a child's bed. Each motion tucks the rose-colored thread into the growing sky of the tapestry, where it lies like the first tender blush of morning light creeping beneath the stars. A breeze wanders into the chamber, carrying with it the faint fragrance of the castle. as small herb garden, bella rosemary, and pennyroyal, bruised by the night wind and the faint sweet dampness of dew settling over the stone walls. The scent mingles with the lingering lavender of the rushes on the floor, weaving its own invisible garland around the tower room. Isolde's breathing slows to match the measured rhythm of her work. She is not sleepy, yet her mind feels loosened from the day's thoughts, moving as quietly as the moth's wings across a beam of light. Every so often her lips part to hum a fragment of an old psalm she learned from a traveling cleric who once lodged at the castle during Lent. The melody is spare, just a rise and a fall on 3 notes, but it fills the round chamber with a warmth that seems older than the stones themselves. Outside, the tide has shifted and begun its slow retreat, leaving the shingle to glisten unseen in the moonlight. The waves' retreating hiss grows softer, its cadence now more like a whisper than a sigh, as though the sea itself were drifting into its own brief slumber before the dawn winds stir it awake again. Isolde pauses her, weaving to rest her wrists, rubbing them gently where the skin is faintly reddened by the loom's wooden edge. She closes her eyes for a moment and tilts her head back, letting the moonlight touch her face while the candle flickers below her chin, painting warm shadows beneath her jawline. The hush of the tower enfolds her like a soft woolen mantle, heavy enough to make her shoulders feel secure, light enough to let her breathe easily. She thinks again of the villagers who will one day stand before this tapestry. The shepherd who will recognize his familiar constellations woven in silver over the blue night sky. The midwife who will tell stories of how certain stars guard travelers on snowbound roads. The children who will trace the patterns with their fingertips and imagine themselves journeying among them. These thoughts bring a quiet gladness that spreads through her chest like the glow of a lantern set in a darkened room. The candle guttering near its end now dips lower, and its flame flares briefly, as if mustering a final effort to keep the room wrapped in golden warmth. A droplet of wax slides down its side and hardens into a pale tear on the brass holder, catching the moonbeam like a frozen pearl. The shuttle glides through the warp once more, slower now, almost reverent. The threads tighten with each pass, the picture of the woven heavens nearing completion even as the night itself inches closer to its edge. A gentle knocking sound comes from the eaves where a loose shutter stirs against its hinge. It knocks once, then is still, as if reminded by the vast quiet to hold its breath again. Isolde lets her hands rest in her lap, her fingers still curled in the shape of their task, as though reluctant to relinquish the feel of the yarn. She leans forward slightly, studying the growing tapestry, with the expression of one reading a letter just received from a long-lost friend. Her lips part, as though to whisper a greeting, but the sound remains unspoken, a breath caught between thought and voice. The night air shifts again, cooler now, carrying the distant, nearly imperceptible rustle of reeds along the moat. That small watery sigh seeps into the stillness of the room, like a final verse to a song sung so softly it can barely be recalled. She rises at last, carefully so as not to disturb the loom, and crosses to the window, where she rests her hands on the stone sill, feeling its chill seep slowly into her palms. She leans slightly outward to watch the stars that still crowd the sky above the shadowed hills. The cool air brushes her face, bringing with it the freshness of dew settling on the grass below and the far-off hush of sleeping fields. For a while she stands like that, unmoving, a dark silhouette framed by the slender slit of the window against the silvered world beyond. The soft rise and fall of her breathing and the gentle stirring of her hair by the breeze are the only signs of life amid the stillness. Behind her, the loom waits silently, its warped threads catching moonlight as though strung with the thinnest of glass wires, each one holding in its tension a tiny gleam of reflected starlight. The night's deepest hush settles across the tower, heavy yet comforting, inviting all within its circle to drift a little nearer to sleep, even as the first unseen birds far down in the valley begin to stir in their nests, sensing the change in the air that heralds morning's approach. The hush that wraps the tower feels softer now, as if the long night has drawn a woolen shawl about its shoulders and is preparing to yield to day. Beyond the window, the stars have begun their slow, graceful retreat into the paling sky. One by one, they seem to dim, not as though extinguished, but as though sinking into a deep blue lake whose surface is starting to ripple with light. The moon itself hovers low, gathering a thin mist around its rim, its glow paling where the first suggestion of dawn rests like a faint watercolor wash along the farthest eastern edge of the horizon. Lady Isolde lingers at the narrow window slit, her fingers resting lightly on the cool stone sill, while her eyes follow the fading constellations. She has always loved this part of the night, the tender moment when darkness loosens its hold and the sky carries both moon and the whisper of approaching daylight in the same breath. A faint smile touches her lips as she notices how the woven stars upon her tapestry glow more clearly in the dimming candlelight than the distant true stars now softening above the hills. She turns back toward the loom and crosses the chamber in slow, even steps that make no sound against the rust-strewn floor. The candle has shortened to a stub and sputters with each breeze that steals through the window, yet it throws a final pool of gold across the lower half of the tapestry, so that the silver threads gleam as though alive. Isolde sits again, lowering herself carefully onto the worn stool, and draws the shuttle once more across the warp, letting the last of the matadite thread settle into its place. The weaving is nearly complete. Only a small crescent of empty blue remains at the lower edge, a space she has saved for a detail she has not spoken of to anyone. From the basket, she lifts a skein of palest cream-colored wool, spun fine and smooth, and ties its end to the shuttle's eye. Before beginning, she strokes the new yarn between her thumb and forefinger, remembering how the spinner had told her it came from the spring shearing of a hillside flock that grazed among wild thyme and clover. She imagines the softness of those grazing fields carried now into her fingers as she guides the thread through the waiting warp. She slide, tap, she slide, tap. The loom sound is even slower now, each movement deliberate, as if it too knows the final strokes of the night's work are being laid down. The cream-colored thread arcs gently beneath the woven sky to form a faint horizon line suggesting distant hills seen under starlight. And with each pass, the picture gains a quiet depth, a place for a weary gaze to rest as it looks up into the embroidered heavens. A robin stirs somewhere far below in the orchard beyond the castle wall and lets out a tentative single note, testing the air, uncertain whether the time for song has truly come. Its soft call reaches the tower window, like a drop of water falling into a still pool. Then is swallowed by the remaining silence. Isolde's lips curve at the sound, for it tells her the first breath of morning is near. She keeps weaving, letting the hush of the tower and the slow rhythm of her work carry her thoughts adrift. Her mind drifts to the chapel where this tapestry will hang, picturing the stone apse bathed in candlelight on winter evenings, the woven stars offering their calm glow to those who kneel in prayer. She thinks of travelers pausing to warm themselves there on cold nights, their weary faces lit softly by the silver constellations she has set in thread, perhaps feeling a moment's reassurance that the heavens above them are constant, no matter how long the road. The candle gutters at last and dies with a thin thread of smoke that curls upward like a sigh. The tower darkens, yet the moonlight pouring through the window and the pale silver of the waking sky lend their own gentler glow, enough to guide her fingers for the final lines of work. Her shuttle moves almost by memory, sliding in time with her breathing. The wool slides snug into its place, and the horizon grows clear and whole. The sea below hushes to a slower rhythm as the tide's retreat leaves more stones exposed to the air. The soft lap of water against them becomes a low, even murmur. In that muted sound, the castle itself seems to breathe, walls easing against the chill, beams settling, rafters quieting, as if the whole structure were stretching before sleep's last hour. Isolde draws the shuttle free one last time and studies the tapestry in the mingled moon and dawn light. The sky she has woven is vast and deep, dotted with silver and gold that catch the faintest glow and hold it like dew. The creamy hills beneath are soft as mist. Between them arcs a pale path of rose-tinged thread that hints at the promise of morning, a path leading the eye from earth to stars. She sits for a long while, simply gazing at what her hands have shaped through the long quiet hours, her breath slowing until it feels as if the air itself were moving in and out of her chest of its own accord. Her eyelids lower but do not close. She remains half awake, wrapped in the hush she has created, the hush that seems to hover in the air, around the loom, and settle gently on the rushes at her feet. A second robin joins the first in its tentative song, their small voices weaving together like two bright threads crossing in the half-light. The eastward horizon now shows a thread of soft silver that runs like a stitch between night and day. The constellations above are fading, yet the tapestry preserves their image, as if holding them close even as the real stars slip behind the pale veil of dawn. Isolde rises slowly, smoothing her skirts, and steps to the window again. The breeze that meets her face is cooler, carrying the damp scent of grass, touched by first light. She leans a little forward, resting her forearms on the stone sill, and watches how the sky's darkness thins into a blue so pale it seems almost translucent. Behind her, the finished loom waits, the tapestry still stretched across it like a captured sky. She glances back once, and in that look is a wordless promise that when the day fully wakes, she will release it from the frame and let it hang free where it can greet all who enter the chapel. For now she stays at the window, letting the first breath of dawn brush her cheeks and lifting her face slightly to the changing sky as though to thank it for lending its beauty to her night's work. Her posture relaxes, her hands rest loosely on the stone, her breathing quiets to a slow, contented pace. The tower chamber is still wrapped in its own calm shadow, yet the air feels fresher, as if the walls themselves have exhaled after the long vigil. The faint scent of new-baked bread drifts upward from the distant kitchens where the first cook has risen, mingling with the clean scent of dew on the herbs below. As the light grows ever so slightly stronger, the woven stars begin to look less like stitches of thread and more like morning frost clinging to blue cloth. The gentle illusion pleases her, a sign that the tapestry can share in the day's changing moods. She closes her eyes for a moment, simply breathing, listening to the distant rustle of the orchard leaves, the hushed roll of the sea, the soft ticking of the cooling stones. These sounds together make a lullaby of their own, one without words or melody, yet capable of carrying a weary listener closer to rest. The world beyond the tower is waking slowly, and soon the quiet will be filled with the calls of birds and the tread of boots in the courtyard. But for these last few moments, the hush remains. And in that hush, one can almost hear the gentle settling of dreams, like a blanket drawn up to the chin. The dawn light spreads like a watercolor wash across the horizon, so faint at first that it seems to come from within the clouds themselves. A single pale gold ray slips through the arrow-slit window and touches the edge of the tapestry, glinting off the silver threads so that the stars appear to shimmer awake once more, reluctant to surrender to the day. Lady Isolde remains by the window, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deep and slow, as though the night's quiet rhythm still lingers in her lungs. Down in the courtyard, there comes the muffled clatter of a pale being set on stone, then the hushed lowing of a cow waiting to be milked. A sleepy groom walks across the cobbles, leading a gray mare, his boots scuffing softly at the frost-damp ground. The sound drifts upward into the tower like a far-off memory of ordinary life, gentle and unhurried, bringing a feeling of warmth that rises alongside the morning light. Isolde steps away from the window at last, her skirts brushing over the rushes in a sighing whisper. She approaches the loom again, as if to be certain that the night's creation truly remains there, intact in the calm of first daylight. She touches the edge of the tapestry where the pale horizon meets the blue of the sky. The wool is cool beneath her fingertips, yet it holds the faintest warmth from her working hands. She releases the woven cloth from the wooden pegs that hold it taut, the quiet pop of each peg echoing softly off the stone walls. The tapestry loosens, sagging slightly as though stretching after a long vigil. She folds the edge carefully over the beam and lets the finished piece drape, its weight making the warp lines hum a soft, low note as they settle. The sound is so gentle it could almost be mistaken for the sigh of a sleepy child. With practiced care, she lifts the rolled tapestry free of the loom. The fabric slides against the wood with a sound like a low hush, the kind that invites silence to linger. She carries it to the small oak chest near the wall and lays it there for the moment, smoothing it flat with slow strokes of her palms as though soothing a living creature into rest. The candle has burned to nothing but a puddle of wax in its holder. She places the stub aside and takes a small clay lamp instead, lighting it with a flint spark. The flame catches and steadies, casting a mellow glow that blends with the cool dawn light and makes the shadows on the stone walls seem softer, rounder, less stern. The loom now stands empty, like a wooden frame awaiting its next dream. Its crossed beams glowing faintly in the growing day. Outside, the orchard trees have begun to rouse. Their branches shake off tiny droplets of dew that fall with a delicate patter onto the grass below. The robin's song grows bolder, joined by a blackbird's cheerful trill that ripples into the courtyard and reaches the tower with a sound as bright as silver bells carried on the breeze. Isolde listens, eyes half closed, letting the song wash over her like cool spring water, carrying with it a promise that the day ahead will be gentle. She kneels beside a small carved coffer where she keeps her needles, spare shuttles, and threads wound carefully around bits of smooth driftwood. Her fingers linger over the spools of woad-dyed blue, the dried sprigs of madder root that had given her the deep red, and a small bundle of dried weld plant she hopes to use next season for a soft golden hue. The earthy scent of these plants clings to the threads, a reminder that each color is not merely pigment but a fragment of field and meadow captured in wool. The sky outside the window brightens further, its pale silver deepening to a shy blue. A thin veil of mist still lies over the distant hills, like a sheet pulled gently across a sleeping child, and the sea below now glimmers with broken patches of light where the first beams of the sun slide across its calm surface. The tide is low. Dark rocks glisten like polished jet, and the retreating water leaves behind ripples that catch the morning glow. Isolde's gaze follows the shifting light upon the water for a time before she begins to tidy the chamber. She shakes out the rushes near the hearth, adds a few dried sprigs of lavender from a bundle hanging on the wall, and stirs the embers so a faint warmth rises once again. The lavender releases its fragrance in the gentle heat, and soon the air of the tower carries that soft, floral sweetness mingled with the faint temps of the sea breeze. She draws the small three-legged stool closer to the hearth and sits for a moment to rest her back, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The quiet, unhurried gestures of her morning routine blend with the distant sounds of the courtyard buckets being filled at the well, a dog shaking its coat and settling near the stable door, the low murmur of two women greeting each other on their way to the bakehouse. These murmurs do not disturb the peace of the tower. Rather, they add to the feeling of life waking softly all around her. Her thoughts drift to the chapel again, picturing the simple stone arch above the altar and the small niche where her tapestry will be hung by night. She imagines the first sunbeam of the day striking through the stained glass window and landing upon the woven hills, making the silver stars shimmer as though newly born. The thought warms her, not with pride but with a sense of quiet purpose fulfilled. The breeze carries upward a faint aroma of baking bread, coarse, rye loaves that will feed the household through the day. The scent curls into the tower chamber and mingles with the lavender and the distant salt of the sea, a combination that seems to tell of comfort and steadiness. Isolde leans back slightly on the stool, eyes half closed once more, letting her senses rest upon these gentle layers of sound, scent, and light. The castle Isolde stones creaked faintly as the warmth of the sun begins to touch their outer walls. The rafters above sigh as if stretching. Dust motes, revealed by the strengthening daylight, drift lazily in the air like tiny golden spores carried on an invisible breeze. Each mote catches a spark of light for a moment before vanishing into the soft glow that now fills the chamber. The hush that had filled the night does not quite leave. It lingers in the corners, beneath the stool, around the quiet loom, as though reluctant to slip away entirely. It seems to promise that whoever enters this room later in the day will still feel a trace of the serene labor that had taken place beneath the starlit hours. Isolde rises again and crosses to the window to watch the sun's first bright edge break free of the horizon. Its light pours gently over the hills, catching in the orchard blossoms and turning each to beaded petal into a spark of living pearl. The sea flashes momentarily like polished steel before softening into the tender blue of morning. For a while, she simply stands there, her silhouette framed by the brightening sky, feeling the warmth of the first rays on her cheek and the cool breeze on the other side of her face. The contrast is pleasant, as though night and day were greeting her together in their passing moment of overlap. Down below, the chapel bell gives a slow, measured toll, only once, to mark the hour of prime. The sound reaches her gently, rolling up the stairwell like a drawn-out breath. It reminds her that soon she must carry the finished tapestry down the winding steps to its waiting place, yet there is no rush. The day has only just begun, and for a little while longer she can linger in this peaceful hush between tasks. She draws the tapestry once more into her arms, careful not to crease its woven surface, and holds it as one might hold a precious shawl against the chest. The wool is cool but pliant, its weight a comforting reminder of the patient hours that gave it shape. The silver-starred sky on its surface seems to gleam faintly even in the daylight, as if it still remembers the moonlight that watched over its making. Standing there in the quiet chamber, Lady Isolde feels an unspoken gratitude for the calm of the night, for the steady loom, for the silent company of the constellations beyond the window. Her gratitude settles into her breathing, and in that breathing there is again the slow, even rhythm that can lull a weary listener toward rest, inviting them to share the sense of completion that comes when a long, gentle labor meets the first light of a new day. The stairwell spirals downward from the tower like a stone ribbon, its steps worn smooth by centuries of passing feet. Lady Isolde moves carefully, one hand brushing the cool inner wall for balance, the other cradling the folded tapestry as though it was something alive and in need of quiet comfort. The air within the stairwell is cooler than the chamber above, carrying the scent of damp stone mingled with the faint warmth of the kitchens beginning to stir far below. A slit window midway down the stairs lets in a spill of pale gold light. Dust motes drift lazily in the shaft of sunshine, and she pauses there for a heartbeat to let the light touch the tapestry's surface. The silver threads wink gently back, as though greeting the new day. She smiles at the sight before resuming her slow descent, her slippered steps soundless upon the ancient steps. The deeper she descends, the more distinct the low murmur of life becomes. Someone drawing water at the well, the muffled thud of a door being shut somewhere across the courtyard, the soft whicker of horses. These sounds reach her without haste or urgency, like the castle is waking from a long nap rather than leaping out of sleep. The tapestry in her arms rests pliant and still, its wool carrying the faint scent of lavender that clung to the rushes upstairs. When she steps out into the corridor that leads to the chapel, the air feels a touch warmer and scented faintly with beeswax and wood smoke. The corridor's narrow windows look out upon the orchard, where the morning sunlight now gilds each branch, and she notices a thin veil of mist rising from the damp grass. The hush of the corridor wraps around her again like a familiar cloak, soft and protective, as if the stone itself recognizes the sacred task she carries. At the heavy oak door of the chapel, she hesitates for a breath, shifting the tapestry so that it rests across both arms. The iron hinges groan gently when she pushes, but even the groan seems subdued in the early hour, softened by the quiet, as though the building is mindful not to disturb anyone's prayers. She steps inside, letting the door ease shut behind her, with a muted thud that fades into the vast stillness within. The chapel is small, its vaulted ceiling low, and its walls of pale stone that gleam faintly in the slanting morning light. A single tall window of colored glass casts a pool of rose-tinted glow across the flagstone floor, and the motes drifting through it appear to blush as they pass. The air is cooler here, carrying the dry scent of old incense and the sweet tints of beeswax from the candles that line the narrow altar. Isolde walks up the central aisle, the tapestry cradled close to her chest. Each step echoes softly, then is swallowed by the calm stillness around her. She feels her breathing slow again, as if the very atmosphere of the place asks her to move gently and speak no word. At the far end, beneath a stone arch, waits the alcove where the new weaving will be hung. shallow niche above the altar, carved with a pattern of vines and tiny stars that have long since worn smooth under centuries of touch. She kneels carefully to unfold the tapestry across the low rail before the altar, allowing it to unfurl like a rolling tide of blue. The silver constellations scatter across the wool as if spilling from the heavens themselves, and for a moment it seems that the night sky has come indoors to rest upon the stone. She runs her fingertips lightly over the horizon. She wove at the base, feeling the subtle ridges where the cream-colored thread met the wove blue, and imagines how travelers will look up at this scene when they kneel here in the dark of winter. A beam of morning light slips through the colored glass at that very moment and falls directly upon the tapestry's center, catching a cluster of silver threads that glimmer like fresh frost on meadow grass. The glow reflects faintly upon her face and hands, as though the tapestry itself is returning the sun's greeting. She bows her head slightly, accepting this gentle blessing in silence. From somewhere near the front of the chapel comes the faintest creak of a wooden pew as the steward's young daughter, tasked with tending candles, slips in quietly to begin her duties. She notices Isolde and halts mid-step, her small face brightening at the sight of the new hanging. The girl makes no sound, merely offers a soft, respectful smile before continuing on tiptoe to the far side of the chapel, carrying her brass snuffer as if it were a candle itself. Her quiet presence feels like another note in the day's calm music, neither intrusive nor jarring. Isolde finishes draping the tapestry so it hangs evenly, its lower edge just brushing the carved stone ledge below. She steps back, folds her hands before her waist, and studies the effect. The silver stars, now illuminated by the mingling of colored glass, light, and pale morning sun, seem to breathe gently against the blue. The cream thread horizon softens the composition, giving the eye a resting place before drifting upward into the woven heavens. For a while she stands there, motionless, her eyes tracing the paths of the constellations she had mapped by memory from nights spent at her tower window. She recalls the old stories her father once told her about those star patterns, the way sailors once steered by them, the way travelers whispered their names in prayer when crossing dangerous passes, the way children once made wishes on their twinkling lights. All those distant voices seem gathered now in the hush of this chapel, held gently within the woolen sky. She senses a movement of air behind her and turns to see the steward himself entering, his expression one of soft approval as he beholds the tapestry. He lowers his head in greeting, but does not speak, understanding instinctively that words would disturb the stillness. He lingers only a moment, then withdraws as quietly as he came, leaving her again with the new-hung weaving and the growing light of day. Isolde kneels briefly upon the cold flagstone, her palms resting lightly on her knees. Not in formal prayer, but in a quiet acknowledgement of the work completed and the night that has passed. The sound of her own breathing fills her ears, slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the distant sea outside. When she rises, she does so unhurriedly, her mind and body both steeped in calm. Outside the chapel door, the castle's life is beginning to quicken. Yet even those livelier sounds, the clank of a bucket chain, the shuffle of hooves, seem softened by the sacred quiet she carries within her. She steps into the corridor again, with the sense that the hush of the tower chamber has followed her down the stairs and lingers now wherever she walks. In the orchard, a breeze stirs the branches so that a few last drops of dew fall upon the grass with tiny, musical splashes. A warm beam of sunlight stretches across the courtyard stones, and a pair of doves settle upon the chapel roof, cooing in slow rhythm, as if echoing the heartbeat of the morning itself. She pauses to watch them for a breath, then moves toward the stairs that will take her back to her chamber to rest at last. As she climbs, the tower feels less like an isolated perch and more like a friend awaiting her return. The empty loom stands in its corner, bathed in daylight now, and the lavender-scented rushes release a little more fragrance as her skirts brush past. She closes the chamber door behind her, leaving the bright hall outside, and lets out a soft sigh that is neither weary nor sad, but a simple exhalation of contentment. She sits once more on the stool by the window, no longer to weave, but simply to look out over the sea, now sparkling under the mid-morning sun. The breeze that drifts in is warmer, scented with orchard blossoms and a faint trace of bread from the kitchens below. Her hands rest loosely in her lap, their work done, her eyes tracing the slow rhythm of waves below. The hush of the night has not entirely gone. It lingers like a gentle echo in the quiet spaces of the tower. In the measured beat of her heart, in the memory of the shuttle's soft slide, she allows herself to lean back against the cool stone of the window niche. Lids growing heavy, a drowsy smile forming as her mind begins to drift. The room, bathed in the mild light of morning, feels like a cradle holding her between wakefulness and dream. If one listens closely, one might still hear the whisper of thread gliding through warp, like a distant lullaby stitched into the very air, a memory of the starlit loom that kept her company through the long, peaceful hours. And as the day moves forward, the chapel below now holds that same quiet in the shimmer of the woven stars, so that anyone who steps inside may feel for a moment as if the calm of a sleepless night's weaving has wrapped itself gently around their shoulders. This completes the morning conclusion of Lady Isolde's tale, bringing the long, soothing arc from night's weaving to the tapestry's peaceful resting place in the chapel. The morning ripened gently over the castle grounds, bringing a golden warmth that slipped into the cracks of stone walls and sparkled on the dew-beaded orchard. Lady Isolde lingered in her tower chamber longer than she intended, half dozing by the window while the sea below turned a calm, translucent green beneath the rising sun. The cries of gulls reached her as muffled echoes, distant enough to sound like memories of the sea rather than the living birds themselves. By midday, the castle's heartbeat had grown steadier, the clink of buckets at the well now replaced by the quiet hum of voices drifting up from the courtyard. Isolde rose from her seat and stretched her arms lightly, feeling a pleasant ache in her shoulders from the night's weaving. She chose a lighter gown of soft gray wool and fastened a pale linen veil about her hair, a simple attire that suited the tasks of a quiet day. Down in the orchard, the air was fragrant with the sweet tang of ripening apples. She descended the tower steps unhurriedly, her palm gliding along the worn stones as if each turn of the spiral stair greeted her with familiarity. Outside, the sunlight dappled the ground through the branches, scattering little pools of gold that trembled whenever a breeze passed. She made her way toward the chapel to see how the tapestry fared in the full light of day. The heavy oak door stood partly open now, allowing the summer air to flow in, and inside the woven sky glowed in a calmer hue, the blue deep and cool beneath the colored glass windows. The silver constellations sparkled only where the light struck them, as though the tapestry itself preferred to keep part of its starfield in shadow for a more secret radiance. A pair of villagers stood near the altar, an elderly woman with a scarf tied beneath her chin and her grandson clutching a small wooden toy horse. They had come to leave a few sprigs of rosemary at the altar, a simple gesture of thanks for the boy's recovery from a winter fever. The child gazed up at the tapestry with wide, fascinated eyes, lifting one hand as though to trace the line of the pale horizon stitched at the bottom. Isolde kept a respectful distance, watching quietly as the boy asked his grandmother whether the stars on the cloth could hear his whispered wish. The grandmother answered softly that sometimes a prayer sent to the stars travels just as swiftly as one spoken to heaven itself. The moment was tender enough to leave a warmth in Isolde's chest, a warmth made richer by the awareness that her long night of work now offered comfort to others. When they left, their footsteps faded gently down the chapel steps, leaving the hush behind them intact. Isolde approached the tapestry once more, touching the lower edge to smooth it where the folds had shifted. The wool was cool to her fingers, but not unfriendly. It carried a faint fragrance of the lavender from her chamber, lingering from the rushes it had rested upon before dawn. She lingered a while in the quiet, her gaze wandering from the woven stars to the flickering candle flames along the side altar. Each flame bent slightly toward the open door where a breeze wandered in from the orchard, and the shifting light caused the silver threads to appear as though they were slowly moving across the woven sky. Later in the afternoon, a messenger arrived from the nearby village, a young man dusty from the road yet polite in his bearing. He brought word of the upcoming midsummer gathering in the valley below, a day of music, dancing, and the old custom of floating garlanded candles down the river to honor the longest light of the year. He bowed, delivering the invitation to the household steward, but his eyes lingered a moment on the new tapestry before he departed, perhaps carrying with him an image to share with others in the village. The idea of the midsummer gathering stirred a distant memory in Isolde of days when she was much younger and would join her cousins on the riverbank to watch the candles drift like little golden boats beneath the twilight. She remembered how the elders used to tell that the further a candle floated before going out, the happier the wish tied to it would become. A small smile curved her lips as she recalled the faint scent of meadow flowers tied to each candle, and the hush that fell over the crowd as the river carried their lights away. Back in the tower, she decided to prepare a modest basket of dyed thread scraps for the village women who often came seeking bits of color to embroider their kerchiefs. She sorted through the spools, setting aside tiny lengths of old blue and madder red, along with a few strands of the pale cream that had formed the hills in her tapestry. Handling these threads felt almost like tending to seeds, small things that would one day bloom into patterns on someone else's cloth. As the afternoon mellowed toward evening, a hush spread once more over the castle, broken only by the soft coo of the doves that roosted along the chapel roof. From her window, Isolde could see the river glinting far in the valley below, winding through the meadows like a silver ribbon catching the late sun. The sight called to her a memory of songs once sung by village bards at midsummer, slow ballads about constellations mirrored in water, about wishes carried downstream to distant shores. The evening breeze carried with it the scent of crushed mint from the herb garden, mingled with the earthy aroma of tilled fields that stretched beyond the walls. She rested her forearms on the stone sill and let her gaze drift skyward, where the first faint stars began to reappear, timid in the glow of the lingering sunset. Those early stars mirrored the silver stitches in her tapestry, each one a quiet spark amid the darkening blue. As twilight deepened, a hush returned that was as profound as the one she had known the night before. A single candle now lit her chamber again, its flame steady within a brass holder. She placed her basket of threads by the door, ready for the village women who would come in the morning, and then sat at the loom's empty frame as though keeping it company. The smooth wood beneath her palms still held the warmth of her recent work, and in the gentle crackle of the wick she felt the echo of the shuttle's soothing slide. Night folded over the castle like a soft mantle, bringing a scatter of stars across the heavens, brighter than the night before. The moon was a thin crescent now, delicate as a pale thread itself, hanging above the distant line of hills. Isolde sat long at the window, watching its silver arc rise higher, and the reflection of stars begin to shimmer again on the distant ribbon of river. It was in that tranquil silence that a notion came to her, a thought that perhaps she might weave another piece. Not a grand tapestry for the chapel, but a smaller cloth to bring to the midsummer gathering, something that could carry a blessing from the castle to the villagers who would soon send their candlelit garlands drifting downstream. The idea was gentle, not urgent, like a leaf floating down to settle upon calm water. She smiled to herself, her eyelids heavy with the same pleasant fatigue that often comes with a day well spent, and allowed her thoughts to drift along that new idea while the candlelight trembled and the stars above began their quiet watch once more. The morning ripened gently over the castle grounds, bringing a golden warmth that slipped into the cracks of stone walls and sparkled on the dew-beaded orchard. Lady Isolde lingered in her tower chamber longer than she intended, half dozing by the window while the sea below turned a calm, translucent green beneath the rising sun. The cries of gulls reached her as muffled echoes, distant enough to sound like memories of the sea rather than the living birds themselves. By midday, the castle's heartbeat had grown steadier, the clink of buckets at the well now replaced by the quiet hum of voices drifting up from the courtyard. Isolde rose from her seat and stretched her arms lightly, feeling a pleasant ache in her shoulders from the night's weaving. She chose a lighter gown of soft gray wool and fastened a pale linen veil about her hair, a simple attire that suited the tasks of a quiet day. Down in the orchard, the air was fragrant with the sweet tang of ripening apples. She descended the tower steps unhurriedly, her palm gliding along the worn stones as if each turn of the spiral stair greeted her with familiarity. Outside, the sunlight dappled the ground through the branches, scattering little pools of gold that trembled whenever a breeze passed. She made her way toward the chapel to see how the tapestry fared in the full light of day. The heavy oak door stood partly open now, allowing the summer air to flow in, and inside the woven sky glowed in a calmer hue, the blue deep and cool beneath the colored glass windows. The silver constellations sparkled only where the light struck them, as though the tapestry itself preferred to keep part of its starfield in shadow for a more secret radiance. A pair of villagers stood near the altar, an elderly woman with a scarf tied beneath her chin and her grandson clutching a small wooden toy horse. They had come to leave a few sprigs of rosemary at the altar, a simple gesture of thanks for the boy's recovery from a winter fever. The child gazed up at the tapestry with wide, fascinated eyes, lifting one hand as though to trace the line of the pale horizon stitched at the bottom. Isolde kept a respectful distance, watching quietly as the boy asked his grandmother whether the stars on the cloth could hear his whispered wish. The grandmother answered softly that sometimes a prayer sent to the stars travels just as swiftly as one spoken to heaven itself. The moment was tender enough to leave a warmth in Isolde's chest, a warmth made richer by the awareness that her long night of work now offered comfort to others. When they left, their footsteps faded gently down the chapel steps, leaving the hush behind them intact. Isolde approached the tapestry once more, touching the lower edge to smooth it where the folds had shifted. The wool was cool to her fingers, but not unfriendly. It carried a faint fragrance of the lavender from her chamber, lingering from the rushes it had rested upon before dawn. She lingered a while in the quiet, her gaze wandering from the woven stars to the flickering candle flames along the side altar. Each flame bent slightly toward the open door where a breeze wandered in from the orchard, and the shifting light caused the silver threads to appear as though they were slowly moving across the woven sky. Later in the afternoon, a messenger arrived from the nearby village, a young man dusty from the road yet polite in his bearing. He brought word of the upcoming midsummer gathering in the valley below, a day of music, dancing, and the old custom of floating garlanded candles down the river to honor the longest light of the year. He bowed, delivering the invitation to the household steward, but his eyes lingered a moment on the new tapestry before he departed, perhaps carrying with him an image to share with others in the village. The idea of the midsummer gathering stirred a distant memory in Isolde of days when she was much younger and would join her cousins on the riverbank to watch the candles drift like little golden boats beneath the twilight. She remembered how the elders used to tell that the further a candle floated before going out, the happier the wish tied to it would become. A small smile curved her lips as she recalled the faint scent of meadow flowers tied to each candle, and the hush that fell over the crowd as the river carried their lights away. Back in the tower, she decided to prepare a modest basket of dyed thread scraps for the village women who often came seeking bits of color to embroider their kerchiefs. She sorted through the spools, setting aside tiny lengths of old blue and madder red, along with a few strands of the pale cream that had formed the hills in her tapestry. Handling these threads felt almost like tending to seeds, small things that would one day bloom into patterns on someone else's cloth. As the afternoon mellowed toward evening, a hush spread once more over the castle, broken only by the soft coo of the doves that roosted along the chapel roof. From her window, Isolde could see the river glinting far in the valley below, winding through the meadows like a silver ribbon catching the late sun. The sight called to her a memory of songs once sung by village bards at midsummer, slow ballads about constellations mirrored in water, about wishes carried downstream to distant shores. The evening breeze carried with it the scent of crushed mint from the herb garden, mingled with the earthy aroma of tilled fields that stretched beyond the walls. She rested her forearms on the stone sill and let her gaze drift skyward, where the first faint stars began to reappear, timid in the glow of the lingering sunset. Those early stars mirrored the silver stitches in her tapestry, each one a quiet spark amid the darkening blue. As twilight deepened, a hush returned that was as profound as the one she had known the night before. A single candle now lit her chamber again, its flame steady within a brass holder. She placed her basket of threads by the door, ready for the village women who would come in the morning, and then sat at the loom's empty frame as though keeping it company. The smooth wood beneath her palms still held the warmth of her recent work, and in the gentle crackle of the wick she felt the echo of the shuttle's soothing slide. Night folded over the castle like a soft mantle, bringing a scatter of stars across the heavens, brighter than the night before. The moon was a thin crescent now, delicate as a pale thread itself, hanging above the distant line of hills. Isolde sat long at the window, watching its silver arc rise higher, and the reflection of stars begin to shimmer again on the distant ribbon of river. It was in that tranquil silence that a notion came to her, a thought that perhaps she might weave another piece. Not a grand tapestry for the chapel, but a smaller cloth to bring to the midsummer gathering, something that could carry a blessing from the castle to the villagers who would soon send their candlelit garlands drifting downstream. The idea was gentle, not urgent, like a leaf floating down to settle upon calm water. She smiled to herself, her eyelids heavy with the same pleasant fatigue that often comes with a day well spent, and allowed her thoughts to drift along that new idea while the candlelight trembled and the stars above began their quiet watch once more. The morning of the midsummer festival came with an early chorus of skylarks rising above the meadows, their lilting notes drifting upward as if the dawn itself had a song to offer. Mist clung to the low fields by the river, a silvery veil that slowly unraveled as the sun began to rise. From her tower window, Lady Isolde watched the day's first light glint on the tiled roofs of the village far below, and for a moment it looked as though each roof had been crowned with a pale, golden halo. She dressed in a gown of soft, undyed linen, light enough for the warmth of the season, and tied her hair in a modest braid so it would not catch the wind. In the alcove by the hearth, the smaller loom stood ready. The woven cloth of riverbank reeds and wild blossoms had been finished the night before, its edges hemmed neatly with a slender border of woad blue. She folded it carefully into a clean linen wrap, tied with a cord of twisted rose-madder thread, so it might be carried without snagging. By mid-morning, the castle gates opened to allow a small company of household folk to make their way down the winding path toward the valley kitchen. Girls in bright kerchiefs, the steward carrying a basket of oatcakes, a pair of guards with wreaths of meadow herbs around their wrists. Isolde joined them quietly, walking with measured steps along the path, lined with wild thyme and low hawthorn shrubs. The air smelled of warm earth and summer grass, a fragrance that seemed to hum in harmony with the bees drowsing among the flowers. The descent took longer than usual, because the children in the group often paused to pluck stray blooms or chase after fluttering yellow butterflies. No one minded. The festival was a day set aside for slow joys. From time to time, the party would stop beneath the shade of an oak to rest, and there they could hear the distant music already drifting up from the village. A faint thrum of drumskin and the lilting tune of a shepherd's pipe carried on the breeze. By the time they reached the green near the river, the village had transformed itself into a scene of gentle festivity. Stalls of bread and honeycomb stood beside barrels of fresh cider, garlands of cornflowers, and marigolds looped from tree to tree. Children raced across the meadow with ribbons streaming from their hands. A makeshift wooden platform had been built for the musicians, where two fiddlers tuned their strings, while a drummer tapped out a playful rhythm that set a handful of youngsters dancing in uneven but merry steps. Isolde found a quiet space beneath the shade of a willow tree near the water's edge. She laid the folded weaving across her lap, enjoying the play of dappled sunlight through the willow's drooping branches. From here she could watch the villagers preparing their candle garlands, circles of woven reeds adorned with summer flowers, each with a small beeswax candle nestled at the center. She saw a boy carefully setting a single white feather beside his candle, perhaps as a secret token to guide his wish upon the river. As the afternoon ripened into evening, the music softened into slower tunes. The smell of warm bread mingled with that of crushed grass, where the dancers had traced their steps in lively circles. The sky above the valley shifted from bright azure to the tender hues of lavender and peach, and somewhere behind the hilltops, the first evening star appeared, timid yet bright. Lady Isolde rose then, and carried her small weaving to the edge of the wooden footbridge that arched over the river's narrowest bend. The villagers nearby grew hushed as they noticed her approach, for many of them had seen her work upon the great starlit tapestry in the chapel and held a quiet respect for the lady who spent her nights with thread and loom. She knelt and laid the folded cloth upon the bridge rail as though presenting it to the river itself. The pattern of river reeds and wild midsummer blossoms, stitched in soft greens and rose-madder pink, seemed to glow faintly in the dusky light. One of the village elders, a stooped man, with a crown of oak leaves resting upon his silver hair, stepped forward to bless the cloth in a few simple words, thanking the river for carrying their wishes each year and the stars for watching over the fields and hearths. His voice was low but steady, and the breeze that moved through the willow branches made it sound almost like a chant carried on rustling leaves. When the sun at last slipped below the far hills and the sky deepened to a velvet blue, a hush fell over the green. The fiddlers stilled their strings. The drummer rested his palms on the rim of his drum. Children crept nearer to the water, their eyes wide with anticipation. One by one, candles were lit, each flame trembling in the cup of its flower-ringed cradle. The villagers knelt or bent low to set them gently upon the darkening surface of the river. A ripple of soft gasps rose as the first garlands began to drift, their lights wavering like tiny golden boats sailing into the dusk. More followed, until the river carried a slow-moving procession of stars that mirrored the heavens just beginning to reveal themselves overhead. The water caught their glow, weaving it into silver-streaked ripples that slipped silently downstream. Isolde stood among them, her own face lit by the gentle reflection of 100 little flames. She felt no need to speak, only to watch as the weaving of reeds and flowers she had brought was laid at the river's edge as a token to join the floating lights. The breeze shifted slightly, carrying the mingled scents of beeswax and crushed herbs, and for a heartbeat the scene felt like a living version of her chapel tapestry. The sky above and the water below joined by glimmers of silver and gold. The night deepened slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the quiet spell cast upon the valley. The constellations grew bolder in their brightness, scattered above the winding line of candlelit water. Somewhere in the meadow, a fiddler began to play again, this time a lullaby-slow melody that meandered in gentle arcs like the river's own current. Couples began to sway to the tune, children curled up in the grass beside their weary parents, and the village dogs lay down with their noses upon their paws, lulled by the same peaceful rhythm. Lady Isolde lingered at the willow tree, her gaze alternating between the floating lights below and the woven lights of stars above. In her heart she felt that a quiet bridge had been formed that night between earth and sky, between castle and village, between her own hands' work and the collective hopes of her people. The river carried their wishes onward, but the moment itself remained still and complete. When at last the candles drifted out of sight around the distant bend, the villagers began to gather their children and their empty baskets. The air smelled faintly of damp reeds now, touched by the night's cooler breath. A crescent moon had climbed high, casting a soft sheen across the meadow's flattened dance circles. Isolde wrapped the empty linen cloth around her shoulders like a shawl and watched until the last faint flicker of candlelight vanished downstream. The hush that followed felt sacred, like the pause after a prayer, and she let it linger in her chest as a kind of inner glow to guide her on the walk back up the hill. The moon hung high and serene as the villagers' laughter and soft chatter faded into the hush of night. The meadow, which hours earlier had been alive with fiddles and dancing feet, now lay calm beneath the silver glow, the trampled grass carrying the sweet scent of crushed petals and wild thyme. The river's gentle murmur continued, carrying away the last of the candle garlands toward unseen bends downstream, their flames flickering until distance folded them into darkness. Lady Isolde lingered at the willow tree a while longer, her fingers brushing the rough bark, as if to thank it for the shelter it had offered her through the evening. She stood very still, letting the cool river breeze draw across her cheeks and tug lightly at the loose tendrils of her hair. The scent of damp reeds rose with the night air, mingled with the faint beeswax fragrance still drifting from the floating candles. When at last she turned to make her way back to the hill path, most of the household group had already begun their slow ascent. Children half asleep on their father's shoulders, the steward carrying a lantern whose glow bobbed like a golden moth among the dark trunks of the orchard trees. The air felt softer now, as if the whole valley were wrapped in a downy quilt of midsummer mist. The climb upward was unhurried. Their steps crunched gently on the dirt path lined with moonlit patches of chamomile and low yarrow flowers that seemed to gleam like little stars beneath their feet. From somewhere far off, an owl called once, its voice hollow and calm, echoing across the fields and back again. The children stirred at the sound, then settled deeper into slumber against their parents' shoulders. Isolde walked beside the steward for a time, the lantern light catching now and then on the woad-blue hem of her sleeve. Neither felt the need for conversation. The shared silence suited the hour, broken only by the slow rhythm of footsteps and the distant hush of the tide against the faraway cliffs. Above them, the stars were brilliant now, the Milky Way spilling like a silver road across the black velvet sky. By the time they reached the castle gate, the torches set in iron brackets along the walls had burned low, their flames fluttering lazily in the draft that came up from the sea. The guard on duty offered them a sleepy nod as they passed under the archway into the inner court. The fountain at the center burbled faintly, tossing soft splashes of moonlit water into the basin where lily leaves floated motionless. The household folk dispersed quietly toward their quarters, carrying drowsy children and baskets of leftover bread and herbs. The steward extinguished the lantern once they were safely inside the gate and wished Lady Isolde a peaceful rest before retreating down the corridor that led to the lower hall. She answered with a gentle nod, then ascended the tower stair alone, her palm grazing the smooth, cool stone of the spiral wall. Each turn of the stair brought her nearer to the familiar hush of her own chamber. At the door she paused, allowing her eyes to adjust to the softer light within. The single candle she had left burning stood steadfast by the loom, its flame steady despite the faint draft that slipped through the window's unlatched shutter. The small finished weaving of river reeds still lay folded neatly on the stool beside it, a quiet reminder of the day's offering. Isolde set the linen wrap she had worn about her shoulders across the back of her chair and stepped to the window to gaze once more at the valley below. From this height the river looked like a darker ribbon sewn through the patchwork of moonlit fields. Though the candle garlands were now long gone downstream, she imagined she could still sense their gentle glow lingering just beneath the surface of the water, as if the river itself had absorbed their wishes into its flowing heart. The breeze that drifted through the open shutter brought with it the faint salt temps of the sea. She rested her elbows on the sill and let her eyes travel across the far horizon, where the pale crescent moon floated above the invisible line of waves. Somewhere out there, unseen fishermen might even now be drawing in their nets, guided only by the moon's path and the star-pricked dome above. After a while, she returned to the small loom and let her fingers glide over the smooth wooden frame as though greeting an old companion. The shuttle rested at one side, the spool of rosemadar thread beside it, and in that quiet moment she found herself humming again the same lullaby-like tune that had carried her through the previous nights of weaving. The notes were soft enough to be mistaken for the sighing of the breeze against the tower stones. She moved then to the narrow bed, tucked into the corner of the chamber, and loosened her braid, letting the strands of hair spill like a dusky curtain across her shoulders. The simple comfort of drawing the linen coverlet over herself felt sweeter after the long day's journey and the tender joys of the festival night. The faint aroma of lavender sachets, stored in the pillowcases, rose as her head sank into the feather pillow, blending with the subtle woody scent of the loom's polished oak. In the shadows, the candle's glow flickered gently, reflecting in the brass buckle of her belt hung on a wall peg, and in the polished surface of the small brass water jug by her bedside. The play of light was slow and soothing, much like the candlelit procession on the river hours before. As the wick shortened and the flame bent low, she closed her eyes to better listen to the world beyond sight. The sigh of the sea breeze, the distant wash of waves, the low creak of timber somewhere in the tower frame, settling for the night. She thought for a time of the festival scene, of the boy who had placed a feather beside his candle, of the villagers who had danced until their laughter softened to murmurs of the garlands that had drifted away like tiny stars returning to the water's depths. The memory warmed her as though she carried the festival's glow in her chest. Her breathing slowed, deepened. The hum of the lullaby faded into silence, replaced by the soft rhythm of her own heartbeat. Outside, the night's constellations wheeled silently above the valley, their paths as ancient and certain as the loom's interlacing threads. The breeze rustled once more at the shutter, as if offering a benediction before settling into a calm night watch. At last, the candle sputtered to a small blue spark, then went out with barely a sigh, leaving only the moonlight to spill its cool silver upon the loom and the folded cloth. Within that gentle darkness, Lady Isolde drifted into slumber, her dreams carrying her along the same river that had borne the villagers' lights downstream, as though she too were now part of the midsummer blessing. The first light of dawn slipped in as a narrow blade of silver through the half-latched shutter, stretching slowly across the chamber floor until it brushed the base of the loom. It glowed there, shy but steady, as though the new day had decided to begin its journey by touching the tool that had brought so much quiet meaning to the long nights. Lady Isolde stirred in her sleep when the morning doves began their muted cooing beneath the eaves. She did not wake at once. Instead, she drifted for a while in the gray-blue, place between dream and waking, where the river still shimmered in her mind beneath. Candlelit garlands and the willow branches still whispered in the breeze. Her breathing kept its slow, even rhythm, echoing the hush of the tide far below the cliffs. When she finally opened her eyes, the air in the chamber felt cool and gentle against her skin. The scent of lavender lingered faintly from the pillow, mingling with the fresher smell of sea air that had wandered in during the night. She lay for another moment, listening to the castle's slow stirring somewhere below. The kitchen maid was coaxing the hearth back to life. The creak of a cartwheel sounded faintly in the courtyard. A sleepy rooster called once and fell silent again. Isolde rose quietly, so as not to disturb the peace that still lingered in the room. She poured water from the brass jug into a small basin and splashed her face, the coolness bringing a soft clarity to her thoughts. She plaited her hair loosely, then wrapped herself in a warm shawl and moved to the window to watch the valley awakening. A thin veil of mist still lay along the riverbanks, softening the lines of meadow and field. Through that silvery haze, the water wound like a polished ribbon of pewter, carrying faint ripples that caught the first pale sunlight. It seemed to her that the river had remembered the night's ceremony and now wore the dawn with the same calm dignity it had worn the candlelight. As the sun lifted higher, the mist began to unspool and drift away across the fields, revealing the fresh-washed green of the summer grass. Here and there, she saw dark dots that marked the shepherds already leading their sheep to pasture. Smoke from village hearths rose in slender columns that twisted in the light breeze before fading into the morning sky. Feeling a quiet gratitude for the view, Isolde decided to take her modest weaving down to the chapel one last time. She dressed simply, keeping the shawl wrapped about her shoulders against a lingering chill, and folded the river reed cloth under her arm. The stairwell smelled faintly of cool stone and the sweet dryness of last year's rushes still scattered along the steps. Inside the chapel, the air was hushed as ever, touched by the faint aroma of yesterday's beeswax candles. The great starlit tapestry still hung in the eastern alcove, its silver thread constellations catching glints of the new day's sunlight that filtered through the colored glass windows. She stood before it a moment, noting how the woven sky looked softer now in daylight, less like the endless heavens above, more like a comforting roof of blue that belonged to the chapel itself. She placed the smaller midsummer weaving on a narrow side table near the votive stand, smoothing its edge with the palm of her hand. Its pattern of river reeds and wild blossoms seemed at home there in the quiet corner, as though offering a quiet greeting to all who entered. She whispered a short prayer that those who came to kneel there might feel a little of the calm the night had offered her. The rest of the castle slowly awakened to ordinary business. The clatter of buckets at the well, the distant ring of a hammer from the smithy, the muffled conversations of stable boys leading the horses out for watering. Yet all these sounds felt softened today, wrapped in the lingering peace of the festival's memory. Returning to her chamber, Isolde found herself moving more slowly than usual, savoring each familiar sight the way that morning sun traced golden lines along the wooden beams of the ceiling, the way the woven rush mats gave off a faint grassy scent, warmed by the light, the gentle gleam of brass fittings at the window latches. She seated herself once more at the loom, resting her fingertips on the empty warp, as though greeting an old friend after a long journey. No weaving was needed that morning. Instead, she simply sat in the hush, feeling the texture of the smooth wood beneath her hands, listening to the soft flutter of sparrows hopping along the ledge outside the shutter. She thought of how each thread she had woven over the past days wove blue for the sky, madder red for the stars, moss green for the riverbanks, had been like a small word spoken in a larger, unending conversation between earth, water, and sky. The memory of the villagers' candlelit procession returned to her once more. The bowed heads, the whispered wishes, the glow of each tiny flame mirrored in the river. She pictured again the little boy's feather token floating beside his candle and wondered where the river might have carried it by now. The image made her smile softly, as if she had been entrusted with a secret. As the morning advanced, a tender warmth began to fill the chamber, curling around her ankles where the sunbeam touched the floor, rising to soften the chill from the night. She leaned back slightly and let her eyes half close, allowing herself a few quiet breaths of stillness before the tasks of the day would call. Beyond the castle walls, the midsummer fields shimmered in brightening sunlight. Crickets began their hidden chorus in the grasses, and the sea below kept its steady hush against the cliffs, a lullaby without end. Inside, in her high tower room, Lady Isolde felt that the night's blessings had settled gently into the stones and beams themselves, as if the whole place now hummed with a softer, slower heartbeat. She remained seated at the loom a while longer, simply listening to the world within and the world beyond the walls, until the line between them felt as thin as a single shimmering thread drawn across the warp. And in that quiet, the story of the starlit loom, the river of floating lights, and the midsummer night's gentle peace all seemed to fold into one another like layers of fine cloth, ready to be kept, cherished, and remembered whenever the hush of evening returned.